እንዴት ናችሁ? ቡና ሰዓት ጥሩ ነበር? ሻይ ሰዓት? ኦኬ ቅድም እንደተነገረው this will be the internet development track panel ነው የሚሆነው። so panel እስካሁን ከነበሩት ከትላንት ጀምሮ ለየት የሚለው ምንድነው? particular presentation አይኖርም፣ ግን እኔ አንዳንድ ነገሮችን these guys might need a translator, or I would switch to English. Okay, until you get, I'm gonna mix, okay, so to engage a little bit. Anyways, this development track will be with a different kind of setting. You guys, I don't think you guys have anything to present. I'm gonna level set some things and ask you some nudging kind of driving questions, and we go from there, and then hopefully the audience will have an opportunity to ask, and I really would like that to happen. So if I need to even cut out some of my questions, I will, because our panel time has been shrunk by 15 minutes because the whole thing kind of got dragged up to now. So as you know, Ethiopia is the second most populous country in Africa. It's been said so many times, and there's an irony that I see that we still have low internet connectivity with penetration, I would say 15-16% of the population having access to the internet. And affordability and reliability is also a concern, but since even though we're seeing a lot of changes in the past, actually recent days, I think that seems like it's a sign of like competition is coming. So let's incentivize, let's retain our client. This is how the beauty of competition is. You're already seeing the effect without even the competitors coming in on board. So it's a beautiful thing. So, and yet we are not moving fast, and as a nation, this really poses a serious threat of being left behind. As you know, fourth industrial revolution is already happening. We're not catching up. It will be disastrous as a continent, as a country. So in this day and age, the internet sits at the core of digital revolution. It's been talked about and all that. And by design, internet's intelligence lies on the edge and not on the core. So we try to highlight some of those today. This means that the internet should empower and enable an individual, a community, a society, and ultimately a country to be innovative and creative in solving both local and global challenges. So we usually refer this as a permissionless innovation. So just remember that word and then explore more permissionless innovation. It does not mean that tech anarchy, technology, it means that it's simply referring to the notion that experimentation with new technologies and business models should generally be permitted and encouraged. So as an open platform, the internet has allowed entrepreneurs to try new business models and offer new services without first seeking the approval of regulators. That's how we are having these, billion-dollar companies around the world. That's why we're having the Ubers and the Instagrams and all the Dropboxes. You can name it, how things are being evolving, the AWS, the Amazons, and the Google platforms and everything, because they didn't have to go and say, is this innovation gonna, is this allowed? They didn't say that. They created it and then influenced the regulators to make it a reality for common good. In his book titled Permissionless Innovation, the continuing case for comprehensive technological freedom, Adam Thier states that the answer to a technological advance is primarily related to a pragmatic public policies that maximize breathing space for ongoing economic, innovative, and social experimentation, evolution, and adaptation. So this is a very, very important thing. He goes on to say that those societies that adhere to such policy vision are likely to experience greater economic growth, while those that do not are more likely to languish and become obsolete. So, but internet sits at the core of this revolution. The premise of internet as an enabler for knowledge-based societies and digital economies is largely dependent on the ability to harness its full potential. So that's what we're going to discuss here. So we have a great panel here, so I'm going to introduce them briefly. So Victor Kyalo, he's been introduced in the morning, so that's him. Reg Orton, no particular order, by the way, I just had it on my slide. So with the white shirt here is the co-founder and CTO of BRCK. BRCK develops a rugged hardware solution for connectivity and remote and difficult settings. So that's what he does. Robert Mullins is a partner at Roha, an investment firm that builds companies in Africa tech companies mainly, or infrastructure companies. Robert serves as the president of Raxio Group, Roha's portfolio company focused on building and developing network of tier 3 huge data center, career neutral data centers across Africa. He's currently doing one in Uganda and Addis Ababa. Ethiopia is coming soon as well. And last but not least, Noel, he's also a friend of mine, co-founder and managing partner at Kudu Ventures, an Ethiopian venture capital firm. Now he's fully moved here from the States and doing great things. So we have a few minutes, and you guys know that time is shrinking, so your answers would be concise and short, and that's how we're gonna continue. 6 focus areas have been mentioned earlier by Brian Guy, so I'm not gonna waste my time by mentioning those. So my hope is that you guys give a good point of view to trigger some questions and continue the conversation into the breakout session. Roundtable is going to continue based on our conversation here. So at the wrap up, we're going to highlight those. So the first question would be for Victor. So as the internet opens up, more adoption increases, we have to ensure that there is enough local expertise and required skill sets to meet the demand. So coming from Kenya, you would have a good perspective on that based on your lessons learned. So not doing so will result in potentially bringing needed skill sets from overseas. And then I think which is negatively impacting local youth, while we have a lot of young people who don't have job employment with the skill set or some training needed. So what are some of the best lessons learned you have observed in your past experience that can be leveraged here in Ethiopia to ensure that there is sufficient local expertise and required skill sets as we are expanding our internet ecosystem in this country?
Okay, I think I'm going to give 4 points in form of points and things which can be elaborated on. The first thing is to develop the capacity that you need is not a preview of any one institution. It has to be a multi-pronged approach. Different players should be allowed and given space to launch skills and technical development or empowerment initiatives literally at all levels, because people will have different capabilities in different areas. At the same time, there should be, maybe through a master plan which is developed by the relevant ministry, a way of coalescing all those ideas together so that eventually they can be streamlined into what can be sustainable in future, either through government putting in resources or the industry coming together and doing something which can really over time not only be dynamic but improve with time based on what is on the ground. A quick example here is 2 initiatives that we started. One was highly technical and supported by our partners such as AFNOG, Afrinic, ISOC, IDRC, NSRC in University of Oregon. We had a very technical track where we wanted to build people with very advanced skills in technical capabilities could build systems and manage systems. And up to today, that still exists, backed by the Kenya Education Network, the research network, the internet here. So you choose some particular people and give them certain parameters or certain areas to really focus on. The second example I would mention is an internship program which we started with the help of partners such as the multinational corporations and the big organizations in Kenya, which we called a presidential digital talent program. And the idea here was, can we leverage on the thought process and thought leadership of some of these industries to mentor our graduates? It started as a very small initiative initially, 100 students or so from the graduating class, grew to 500, grew to 1,000, and today it's actually nationwide and adopted as by government as one of the pillars of the internship program for graduates in the country. So I would say that those are some of the things that I would think about on top of the head. Thanks.
Appreciate it. Thanks. Thank you for your concise response. And I would encourage the rest of the panelists to limit your response to 3 minutes or less. And I know it's hard, giving you a hard time here. This question, while we're not leaving the position in the local workforce to the next one, was supposed to be for one of our great panelists. She was not able to come because of coronavirus caution, but we're fine here, right? So, Reg, if you want to chime into that, let me ask you quickly that, because you're doing something disruptive and, leapfrogging, this whole ecosystem, internet business is highly, fluid, right? Things change overnight. So how can we develop new educational models that can fit into this evolving, ever-evolving kind of model, focused tech trainings and whatnot to accommodate these rapidly evolving needs of the internet economy that Ethiopia.
I can tell a couple of stories. So, like, Rick started about 6 years ago. We're a hardware company. So we started out 6 years ago as a hardware company. We've since moved on. We're doing different things now. But when we first started, we were trying to hire hardware engineers. And Africa doesn't have a long history in developing consumer electronics. There's a couple of companies. I think Ethiopia had the first cell phone manufacturing company. Rwanda's now rolling out cell phone manufacturing. But really, there wasn't a deep skills yet. But if you go to the universities, they're still teaching it. And the universities are doing a fairly good job of teaching the basic skills, of teaching the underlying technology. How does a volt work? How does a byte work? But what was missing when we were trying to hire engineers was experience. Like, how do you actually build a product? What are the things you'll find challenging along the way? And it's taken us a long time to work through that and work in, like, now we have very senior engineers in our company. And there's a couple of things that really did affect, and I think Victor mentioned a few of them, Kenya, and to build these skill sets. And so one is internships. So we actually did have a few of the presidential internships that Victor mentioned, and we've followed them through their career, and now they're doing really well. They're now tech leaders in their own sphere, and that's been a very influential part. The other one is like finishing school. And I don't know if that's the correct term, but there's a number of schools now that are teaching students how to work. So maybe they come out of university and they know all the theory, but how do you actually build an app? How do you work with a team? How do you run a team? How do you upload to GitHub and work with a multinational corporation? Groups like Nairobits in the early days of Nairobi were very influential. Andala and Moringa School are doing great work in that area. And then just quickly, the private sector has a big part to play in that as well. And so I mentioned internships and doing that work. Bringing back the diaspora. I mean, I think even on this panel, there's a few of us or a few people here who have either come back or are trying to come back. And I think that's there's so much technical skill that's come from Ethiopia, that's come from Kenya, that's come from Africa, that is now spread around the world. We need to bring those people back somehow through either good investment or through strategic initiatives from the government that will help Ethiopia and Kenya and Africa leapfrog. And then the last thing is, I think one of the things that a lot of companies in Africa struggle with is losing control. And one of the things we've had to cope with as a company is what happens when people quit. People move on. And I remember talking to someone in Silicon Valley, and they're telling us, we move every 6 months. Someone can move from Facebook to Google, from Google to Microsoft, and back again to Facebook. And that collective knowledge starts to become shared. And I think we need to embrace this idea that yes, we need to look after our employees, and yes, we need to encourage them to stay. But if they move on, maybe that's not such a bad thing.
So let's move on to the next topic, which is bringing internet everywhere. The second key topic in this track. We know that Ethiopia has a population kind of demographics where 70 to 80% of the population living in a rural, or in technical term, like in off-grid areas, right? So last mile connectivity is the biggest challenge as we know it. And without having that large population in mind, talking about internet economics, internet adoption might not mean really much in terms of scale and success factors. So besides that, even with the urban setting, past internet coverage and affordability, as I said, still needs improvement, while we are seeing some hopeful stuff coming up. As you guys know, I think recently I heard that now Ethiopia, Addis Ababa has a complete 4G coverage. Is that correct? Is that has been said? Okay. I make a mistake here. I just saw it. I came to Ethiopia on Saturday, so I saw some sign that says 4G coverage in the entire Addis. That's a good news. But with a bigger picture, Ethiopia has a 2% 4G coverage as we speak. Ethiopia as a nation. So there's a lot to do, even besides the off-grid area. So Robert, While Ethiopia continues to pose unique challenges around internet adoption rate, it also has an exciting opportunity because there's a lot to be done. So telecom market opening up is one example. That's exciting start. And so how can we battle the challenges and tilt the balance shifting towards this opportunity and growth to have an efficient and adoptable, affordable, I should say, internet for all?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I don't want to rehash a lot of the good points that were made, in this morning's session. I think that are very sort of policy driven about the availability and about accessibility and cost of internet. I think a lot of slides indicated that cost is still very high, accessibility is still low, reliability is still difficult in this country. So I think that's really what it boils down to. And I think the question, there was a lot of sort of policy points about how those things can be improved, about competition, liberalization. I just wanted to pick up on a couple of things that perhaps were not, explored in the earlier session. I think a couple of points were mentioned by Victor especially, but I think the concept of shared infrastructure, I think, is one that is critical, especially when you're building from the point from where Ethiopia is starting, right? To think about shared infrastructure from the very start. And that kind of cuts across many of these different parts of infrastructure, be it from the tower infrastructure, and the regulation around that and how that is processed as part of this liberalization process. Secondly, fiber, sharing fiber infrastructure. Again, in the early days of some of the developments in neighboring countries, everyone was putting in their own fiber. Ultimately, there started to be open access networks, which made, drove costs down, made reliability and accessibility better for everyone. And that also comes into an area where we've started to invest from a Roha perspective, which is in data centers. For us, looking across the continent, a lot has been invested in mobile networks, as you said. I think there's good coverage in Addis. I think expanding coverage across the country here. A lot of fiber has been put in across the continent, both in subsea and also in terrestrial fiber. Obviously, less so in Ethiopia so far. But one of the areas that has been overlooked is data centers. That's kind of the third leg of the stool of digital infrastructure, which we believe is critical. It also goes back to Victor's mention of the IXP, right? IXPs are a very good example of kind of, a shared network infrastructure piece, which is in general quite easily, implemented, but has the consequence of driving costs down because all traffic stays local. And I think Ethiopia really has the opportunity to look at these other markets, neighboring markets, and lessons learned, and really focus on a shared infrastructure model from the very start.
So, Reg, actually, your company is actually trying to do some disruptive innovation to kind of, fill this gap a little bit, to bring internet for the underserved, right? So, how can we have or scale up this, we call it bottom-up innovation, self-contained innovation, whatever you want to call it. How can we take those practical steps to in identifying alternative approaches while we have the fibers all the way to the rural Ethiopia, and the other, huge infrastructure developments? How can we do these mini community-based, self-contained, bottom-up innovations? And then based on your experience, how can we do that? Maybe that can really be the immediate remedy, I would imagine. So can you expand on that?
Sure. So for those of you who don't know, BRCK runs a Wi-Fi platform called Moja. Moja is actually a fairly interesting technical platform. It's distributed technology. We've invested very heavily in how we do some quite interesting technical things. But there's a few things that are quite interesting from a commercial point of view. And the first is, so we have 800,000 monthly active users. We've served over 3 million customers on a network in Kenya. It's a pretty significant network. I think it's the largest public Wi-Fi network in Africa, last I counted. And we only have one router. And that's kind of crazy if you think about that from a network perspective. And it's because we've really tried from the beginning to think about disaggregation. And disaggregation and shared services can enable competition and can enable these disruptive services to come in. And the way to think about that is, we're very good at building monetization platforms that allow users to get online for free. Users can, on our platform, can watch an ad, they can do some AI training, they can earn some credit, they can get access to the internet. We're pretty good at building edge hardware. We know how to build ruggedized Wi-Fi routers that enable our technology. We know how to roll out connectivity in buses and matatus, if you've seen them. I think Addis, I've seen actually a lot nicer buses than in Nairobi. But there's informal infrastructure. There are companies that are much better at this than us at running back-end infrastructure. CCOM runs very good cables. There's companies that do data centers very well. And if we can leverage those other companies, we can work in our niches to focus on specific areas that can really affect change. And so I think that's the thing I want to bring up is, how can, if you think about, if you're a large MNO, you're trying to build a moat. You're trying to build a moat around your infrastructure so no one else can compete. We're not near saturation. Don't worry. If a player like BRCK is going to come in, we're not going to take away from the tier one. In fact, on our own platform, we had a pay-for-service platform for a long time. We rolled out the free service, and we thought we were going to lose all our money. And actually what happened is we still have the same number of users paying for the service. We just have 5 times the number of users who are getting access for free now.
Thanks, Reg. Let's move on to the third point or important topic of this track, which is money, right? Attracting investments. It's very obvious at this point now that in order to develop and grow this kind of ecosystem that we're talking about, considerable amount of investment is needed. It's just beyond imagination for the kind of work that Ethiopia needs. There's significant infrastructure undertaking requiring huge investments that these gentlemen are talking about, and the previous participants to deploy fiber and 4G and Wi-Fi based solutions. And when all these are impossible, satellite internet, which is expensive, and last mile off-grid solutions and all that, there are some similar economies trying to do, some box which has its own, solar supply for the computers, and also kind of somehow communicate with a bigger network and to beam some internet for the locals. And one of the participants actually was supposed to be a person from Loon, Alphabet's parent subsidiary, who's trying to do, I'm sure I've done that on my show, that trying to beam the internet from the balloon up in the air so that the off-grid, a community can tap into that potential. But anyways, this is just to highlight how much work is needed, and then all that comes back to investment and financial, a commitment. So Noel, this question is for you. As a person who came back to the States, from the States to Ethiopia, and thriving to be one of the pioneers to introduce investment in the form of venture capital, but specifically around tech initiatives and tech works. What was your challenge? What do you think can be done to incentivize and to attract more stakeholders, players to be in this playground? So just share us about that.
All right, thank you, Solo. So I think there's a lot of challenges, especially when it comes to the internet and to relate to what we do. So I'm not an expert on the internet, but we invest in tech, oriented in tech enabling startups. So a lot of times we see challenges in relation to the speed of internet. It can be the cost of internet, the limitations of how good the service may be. So we see countries like Madagascar, for example, that are a top outsourcing destination because of the speed of internet. As we see here, until now, we still only have a sole provider. I think this year international players are coming in, and that's extremely encouraging to us. And again, costs going down now. I think the unlimited package for a lot of startup founders that they use is, I think, about $3,200 per month, which is about $100, which is extremely expensive for an African country. In the US, I remember, I think I paid $50, $60 maximum for good quality and fast internet. So there's a lot of restriction in terms of founders and the type of access they get and how much it costs them to actually use the internet. And also, internet being readily available across the city, I think, is extremely important for innovation as well. When we look at me and Solo actually just talking about it, when you look at how many tech hubs there are, for example, in Addis, there's only 8 tech hubs. In Africa, there's almost 700, and we're the second most populous country. So kids don't even have, so young entrepreneurs don't even have to go, don't have places to go to properly use internet, have access to Wi-Fi, and actually be able to innovate. So I think international players coming in and the infrastructure becoming even more advanced is extremely critical to innovation to grow properly.
Thanks, Noel. Just to add on that investment piece, I think this question is now coming to you, Robert. It's supposed to be for the other panelists. So based on your experience, I know you have a lot of international experience. So from similar economies, just kind of deploying your company and then providing infrastructure, what are some of the major pitfalls in doing this kind of thing and challenging and all the problems and to attract investment in the midst of that? How do you attract investment? where there's a lot of challenges, a lot of hurdles and stuff, especially from infrastructure building perspective. So also, what are some of the key strategies that you can kind of prescribe to practitioners here to overcome and attract and encourage both local and foreign investments?
So I would say there's one thing that scares investors away the most. I would say it's uncertainty, uncertainty is hard to solve for, right? And so I think when we look at different markets in which to invest, you're never going to have 100% certainty on certain things. But I think when you're looking at regulation in particular, you want to try to give yourself as an investor the confidence that for the period during which you expect to be investing, or for the time frame of your investment, there's at least a certain amount of certainty, not to be redundant, but a certain amount of certainty around the key regulatory aspects of your business, right? And so that can be in certain cases simply an absence of regulation creates uncertainty, as is the case here, right? During this whole process of liberalization, and the regulator just being formed a few months ago, there's still quite a lot of uncertainty around how that's all going to sort of play out. In other cases, it's politically driven uncertainty, right? Because there might be regulation in place, but you don't know how long that's going to last or how the wind is going to blow. There's election cycles also involved that can have an impact. So uncertainty is really the one thing that we really want to watch out for. And then beyond that, I think it's sort of the classic the classic things, especially when you're investing in infrastructure. You look at things like taxation and import duty, things like that can incentivize. At the end of the day, if you're building a data center, you're importing pretty much 100% of the technical equipment that's there. Of course, the construction and things like that can be local, but basically 100% of the technical equipment that's brought in is the technical equipment is imported. And so taxation around import duties and different things like that can disincentivize investment is something that I think from a policy perspective needs to be observed.
What do you prescribe to deal with this challenge you call uncertainty?
Well, I think again, uncertainty is I don't know what I would prescribe, but I think it's just as an investor when we select the markets that we choose, it's what we kind of look out for. What I would prescribe on the other side is to avoid over taxation, obviously, in particular when it comes to things like imports and things like that, because at the end of the day, when you're investing in high capex projects with imported equipment, that's one thing that you look out for. And then certainly over regulation, right? And we've definitely avoided investing in certain markets because of not just uncertainty, but over regulation. Regulators being greedy about license fees and things like that. If I was to prescribe something, is do not over regulate. Encourage investment. The usual sort of investment encouragement policies that I think are not rocket science.
Thanks, Robert. The fourth pillar of this track is building strong internet economy, which is really, really important. As any strong internet economy is driven by enabling policy and regulatory framework, strong institutions, universal, affordable, and good quality connectivity. I know we're going to just say this until the dead horse is just beaten over and over again, because this is the issue right here. And digital skills and end-user device affordability and all that. And then one interesting report actually suggests that some economies have reported at least 0.8% increase in GDP per capita. You see, it can trickle down to individual quality of life in terms of finance and convenience and all that. So 0.8% GDP per capita contribution of 10% push of this innovation and economy and the internet economy and infrastructure building. You see the impact is just 10% what it can do. So to talk about this, I think Victor would be the best person. Earlier it was said that GDP of Ethiopia surpassed Kenya's, but the catch is GDP per capita is way higher than Ethiopia and Kenya. And I would imagine that the internet and the digital economy contributed to that factor. So Victor, we have a deeper problem that needs innovative interventions in all major sectors in Ethiopia. Agri, education, financial inclusion, public sector, tourism, health, retail, you name it. So from your experience in your country, beloved country, how can we make sure these sectors benefit from internet ecosystem and economy so that we can bring solutions to our critical issues and increase quality of life food insecurity can be gone because I mentioned those sectors, literacy, financial inclusion, and all that can be achieved and realized. And ultimately, having a GDP per capita, that's when we say the internet economy really contributed to the benefit of the country and its people.
Thank you. I think at times it becomes very difficult to measure the actual impact of internet on the different sectors of the economy. But 2-3 key things which are very important is, number one, it's very important to identify the barriers. Why are people not using ICT, especially innovators in certain sectors? And once you identify those barriers, it's very easy now to tackle it. For instance, if we want to people to start having solutions which target agriculture or which target tourism, and we identify why is it that they're not able to do it. Maybe the transaction, they don't have the ability to be able to interface some systems to be able to transact in those sectors. And if you address those barriers, you let the innovators and entrepreneurs to really be able to work in those areas. Becomes one of the major contributors to making sure it's used effectively to affect the economy. The second thing which I would think about, which we really try to look at quite critically, is walking the talk. At times, governments talk a lot in strategies and policies and all sorts of things on how they are keen to attract investment which will grow the internet economy, but the actions actually don't tally. They actually don't walk the talk of what they're saying. For example, an investor will come and he wants some taxation incentives. We know it's very hard to give such incentives, but what is the alternative? You need to have other ways of making sure the investor can put his money and grow the economy or grow the sector that he's looking at. Or an innovator who has come up with some solutions has access to data for authentication, which more often than not, government holds for him to be able to do KYC if he's going to offer a service which has some credit offered to the users. My final point when it comes to the internet economy is that half of the time you're not sure of where you're going. And working with my team in this area, my motto used to be a bit of misunderstanding of what Nike stands for when they say just do it. And I just used to tell the team, just do it. Just let's see what happens. Just go ahead and try it. I don't think there's any one right or wrong way of getting people to really be innovative and get solutions to address this sector.
In lieu of time, I'm going to cut one question from this topic and move on to the next pillar because Victor gave good perspective on that one. Enhancing local entrepreneurship is one other key area for this track. So, it's obvious that local entrepreneurs are key to providing alternate local infrastructure, services, and solution as an expanded ecosystem because የራስን ችግር ራስ ነው መፍታት የሚቻለው ultimately የውጭ experience እንደሚያስፈልግ ሆኖ ያለ ግን enhancing local entrepreneurship is very key. So they understand because why? Because they understand local context, culture, provide competitive option, and at times they grow into regional giants. And we have a couple of role models in this situation. However, in many developing economies, entrepreneur faces numerous entry point challenge and growth barriers, right? So Noel, you kind of mentioned some of them earlier, but I want you to kind of elaborate on that based on this pillar here, enhancing local entrepreneurs. How can we strike a balance between this consumer environment? Because it's stifling here, so we need experience from outside, right? So that there's that mindset because we need it, but versus the producer mindset of growing this ecosystem within local resource and talent, and make sure that balance is stricken well, so that our own local entrepreneurs are empowered and enabled to be key players in the marketplace rather than being suppressed and marginalized when the time comes.
Thank you. I think that's a really good question because a lot of times we do see big international companies coming in and usually just exploiting talent or maybe not investing on capacity, building as much, and pretty much just taking a bunch of advantage and not really giving back. But now I remember the last couple of conversations we've had even with the bigger tech players, including Facebook and Twitter and other players, is that they're really interested in coming in, building capacity, actually hiring people as well for the international operations and not just focus on the whole Silicon Valley. But I think the big part is that for international players coming here is extremely important, I believe, to partner with local entrepreneurs. As you guys mentioned, they have the local experience, they understand the market, they understand the pain points. So I think it would make much more sense, not just from the impact perspective, but also from like the longevity of it and sustainability. I think it's important for them to partner with locals. And I think capacity building is the most important thing we need, because even when they do end up leaving, at least there's something we're holding on to. So I hope as much money has been spent on the infrastructure of building a manufacturing hub or a manufacturing-driven economy. I think as much should be invested in internet infrastructure and the tech ecosystem in order to make sure we have long-lasting, capacities and knowledge in order to support ourselves.
Thank you, Noel. Victor, back to you. I'll come to you guys. Because I really believe in lessons learned and best practices. Because I think really, do not reinvent the wheel. Be foolish, wasting resources and time and everything else. So if there's similar economy, we've done it, we've gone through it, and then now a testament in many aspects, I want to come back and tap into that experience. So based on your encounter, because earlier when you were introduced, I think you support a lot of Kenya's ICT growth and the whole economic ecosystem building around that. So based on those encounters and with best practices and lessons learned in your experience, what kind of strategy and recommendation do you suggest that can promote and support the emergence and growth of local entrepreneurs to compete as internet ecosystem opens up, as we speak? So what is your experience from Kenya, and what do you tell Ethiopians in that regard?
Okay, again, I want to narrow this down to two key things. I think that the first thing is deliberate targeting of people's capacity in certain areas. And for us, one of the key things was to put resources in getting good software development discipline, because people knew how to develop, knew how to work with software, but they didn't have the discipline and the work ethics to work within environments which had very clear targets. So we partnered with Carnegie Mellon University, costed the country quite some good dollars, but the results were such that we had companies like IBM, Microsoft, Philips, and the others setting up their research labs in the country because the resources, the human capacity was there. But government had to take and bite the bullet to be able to develop those capacities. The second thing that we did, but in a very small scale, was to prove to the international community that we do actually have people who can develop solutions which can be used. And again, we put some money in giving people some grants, and the grants were actually free money which they were not going to pay back. They were like, I would say, it's like angel capital, where I would say we can give you up to $10,000 to develop your idea and take it to the market. Out of 90-something recipients of that, maybe we had 3 or 4 who succeeded and they're still in business today. We had another category where we were giving matching funds to people who had come up with some solutions. And the idea was, if we give you $100,000, you've already invested $100,000, and you take whatever product that you had to market. That worked very well. And we had 2 successful companies coming out of that. But most important is that we gave the venture capitalists and people who wanted to invest in these businesses the opportunity to come and find a market which had been sensitized on the need to doing things the right way, and a government which had said, not only are we doing this, but we put our money to get this industry moving. The last thing that we did, which I thought was quite encouraging, was to partner actually with some MNCs and tell them there's a solution you want to solve in government, but we want you to be able to do it at a fee, but you're going to include as part of your subcontractors through a competitive process some of the local companies which would want to grow to a certain level. Unfortunately, we did not fully succeed in creating huge companies the way we wanted to do, but that's still a process. I would say it's still a process it's still a working process, because our procurement laws were changed to try and capture that without disadvantaging the MNC. So you don't put the burden on the MNC, you put the burden on the side of the government. And I believe those three initiatives really bore fruit and will be realized in the long run as we move on. Thank you.
የመጨረሻውን ፒላር ዲስከስ ከማድረጋችን በፊት I think quick announcement አለ so ቤታ
Sure. Thank you. If there are people here in this room who are invited to participate to the rural connectivity meeting, please, you can leave now and meet David outside. And if you cannot find him outside, go straight to the Jacaranda room. Thank you.
Okay, this last pillar is my favorite, right? I really like it because I think it was asked in the morning, and then that's the issue right now, which is what are you going to do with the internet that you have once you have it, right? So it comes down to content. So encouraging content providers and service providers locally within Ethiopia. So in 1996, Bill Gates wrote an essay titled "Content is King," Maraja Nibusno, where he predicted in 1996, before the dot-com boom or at the dawn of that, he predicted that content will offer the real value proposition for the internet. So internet without content will become just nothing but just a bunch of wire and waves in the air. So that is exactly what's happening right now after, 24 years? That's exactly what's happening right now. Data is the new oil, right? And content. So promoting homegrown digital content creators and service providers is critical in this juncture of growing internet economy. And notably, Ethiopia has this unique value and position. It was mentioned yesterday that with our own custom and tradition and language, so we can really generate, organic contents that can solve issues, not only for entertainment purpose. When we say content now, thanks to, social media revolution, the first thing that comes to us is what? Somebody's status update, right? Content. So we have to come out of that mentality and then think about content from solving our critical issues in all sectors that we mentioned, agri, finance, and health, and tourism, and e-governance, and you name it. So with that, Reg, let me ask you this question. So through BRCK, you have been involved in both content production as well. While providing that connectivity, you also provide some sort of content provision and service provision around it. So I want to tap on that experience and so that you can share it to the audience. So what are some of the best lessons you learned in terms of challenges and success stories doing that, content generation and distribution? And based on that, what is your advice to develop and adopt effective strategies to encourage and promote the development of local content producers and providers?
Sure. So at BRCK, we've gone through a couple of different areas of looking at content. The first was realized that in the education market, there's a huge need for relevant content in schools and primary schools and high schools. Our role in that, I talked about before about disaggregation, our role isn't to produce content. Like, we don't feel like we're very good at it. We don't really want to become good at it. But what we want to become very good at is getting that content into the hands of users. At Moja, where we're looking now is, what are the formats that make the most sense for users? Where are those users? Are those users in their homes? Are they in their bedrooms? Are they on buses? Are they in the public spaces? And then, what are they interested in? Like, are they interested in long form content like Netflix? They want to watch a Hollywood movie for a long period of time, or do they want to, spend 2 seconds watching something on TikTok or Twitter or on Facebook? And I think where the opportunity lies for Ethiopia is, yes, there's a huge opportunity for content creators to develop true Ethiopian content. But there's also an opportunity for content platforms to emerge that's specifically tailored to the needs of Ethiopians and the needs of Africans. If you look at the animation market, there's a number of actually now Kenyan companies and Nigerian companies who are really focusing on how can you provide African anime, which is a Japanese style of comic. And it's taking off. I mean, there's a number of companies that are doing that. And again, they're not necessarily producing, but they're enabling producers to produce that content. And the same with music. There's a long history of music across the continent that is varied and also common. Can we provide music services to the users that are locally focused? I think that's a big opportunity.
Thanks, Reg. Robert, again, you are the luckiest lucky. One question punted from Julie to you because she's not here. So relevant and consumable contents are critical for the growth of internet economy. So Don't worry, you didn't miss anything, Robert. So they come not only from the private sector, these content generations, but from the public sector, from educational institutions, from other users in the community that, as we call it, this crowdsourcing content generation, but something relevant for the need of the community and the country. So how can we promote such kind of contents across the board that are educational, entertaining, not only entertaining, but increasing quality of life, give data insight for the government, different stakeholders, the private sector, and then other important sectors.
Yeah, so I've inherited this question, so it's a little bit out of my field, but I would just answer that maybe again going back to some of the initial questions about accessibility. I think one of the key things is having the infrastructure to be able to deliver that content, in a way that enhances user experience, right? And, back to the point earlier, different kinds of content require different kinds of infrastructure to be able to be delivered in a sort of user-friendly and user-accessible way. If you look at some of the bigger sort of content delivery networks and how their interest in the African markets has increased over the last 5 years, that's really telling. Also about if you look at how the consumption and the data traffic around consumption. I read some crazy statistics about how much of the international traffic here in Ethiopia is actually Netflix, right? So there's definitely hunger and appetite for both local content, but also international content. And I think, again, creating the infrastructure, and in this case, I think data centers are a critical part of that infrastructure, as I said before, where that content is closer to the population, more accessible, reducing latency. It just creates an environment whereby that content is able to be consumed by the local markets.
Thank you so much. As we wrap up this, I want to give you some time for you to ask questions. So as we wrap up, I really want to, actually this is a summary, so maybe these guys need to hear that. Okay, I was reading in English. So as we wrap up, I want to paint this bigger picture and set a perspective. At the end of the day, we're living in this amazing place called Earth, so we cannot detach ourselves from the global phenomenon. So technovation, as I call it, technology innovation is the main driver of this, digital revolution, fourth industrial revolution, whatever you want to call it. And so at this point, it's argued that every company or every business is a tech company or a tech business, or enabled by it or based on it. So Ethiopia is a part of this global community, cannot be excluded from this trend. That's why we need to keep screaming about this thing. So let me just tell you something interesting, right? I'm sure you heard this one. The sub-Saharan GDP, as I heard it like a few months ago, I collected the information, is around $1.6 trillion. Yeah, remember that, $1.6 trillion, maybe a little difference now, because I put together this for other speech a few months back. And only 5 mainly internet-based tech companies that we talk about, tech, internet, namely Apple, Amazon, Facebook, Google, and Microsoft, collectively have a market capitalization amount of $4.5 trillion. Just think about that for a second. 5 companies, $4.5 trillion. In sub-Saharan African GDP collective, you know how many countries we're talking about? 48 countries. And it is $1.6 trillion versus 4.5 for 5 companies. And most of those companies are millennials, like 20-something years. And one of the oldest might be Microsoft, 70-something, 74. So just that gives you that bigger picture of what the internet is capable of doing, right? To make it even interesting, the entire African continent, including the North, which has a stronger GDP when they are added, it's about $2.1 trillion collectively. Africa as a continent, the GDP power. And yet these 5 companies have 4.5, as I said, so almost double than the entire continent in terms of market capitalization and value. So this shows the power of internet, really. So in conclusion, the 6 things that we talked about today, I hope are very critical and important for the development of the internet. የጠቀስናቸው ይህኛውን ትንሽ በአማርኛ በላችሁ ትልቁ ነገር የሰውን የስራ ስኪል ሎካል ወርክፎርስ ማሳደጉ አስፈላጊ ነው ብለን ተነጋግረናል። ኢንተርኔትን በየቦታው ማሰራጨት በተቻለ መጠን የገጠራማውንም የኢትዮጵያ ክፍልም ካሁኑ በዚህ ቅድ ውስጥ ማካተት በጣም ወሳኝ ነው ብለናል። እንደገና ደግሞ ጠንካራ የሆነ የኢንተርኔት ኢኮኖሚ ይሄን ሁሉ ካደረግን በኋላ ኢኮኖሚ በዙሪያው መገንባት አለብን ብለን ተነጋገርን። ከዛ ደግሞ ይሄን ኢኮኖሚ ለመገንባት ገንዘብ ያስፈልጋል። ምንም ሌላ ተአምር የለውም። ስለዚህ ኢንቨስትመንትን አትራክት ማድረግ መቻል አለብን ብለናል። ከዛ በኋላ ደግሞ እሺ ሁሉ ከተደረገ በኋላ አልቲሜትሊ ስራ መፍጠር ነው እቅዳችን። እንዳልነው በጣም ብዙ ወጣት ስራ የሌለው አለ። የኢትዮጵያ መንግስትን ትልቁ ዓላማ እሱ ነው። ጃብ ክሬሽን ኮሚሽን የሚባል ይሄን ሁሉ ራን የሚያደርግ ተቋም ሁሉ እስኪቋቋም ድረስ ነገሩ ሲሪየስ ነው።
Until we establish an institution that govern this activity, entrepreneurship and innovation, everything should be increased. Then what? So when we switch pipes, that's for water, but for internet, it's about information dissemination.
Our experience ይህንን ነገር እንድናደርግ ማለት ነው። መጨረሻ ላይ ሶስት ኪ at the end of the day from this track that we can carry over to the round table conversation after lunch, because you guys will be walking around and moderating and providing insight and point of view within that around conversation. So I will ask you 3 key things. You can work amongst yourself if you want. I will give you a minute, but 3 things we're going to drive so that you can think about that after the Q&A. With that, ለጥያቄ ለመድረኩ ከፍታለሁኝ። በአማርኛም በእንግሊዝኛ መጠየቅ ይቻላል። ጥያቄዎቻችሁን አጨራርጡና እነሱ እንዲመልሱ የምትፈልጉት ካለ ጥያቄ ማይክ ያስከሆነ እሺ፣ ጥያቄ የምትጠይቁ በእነዚህ ጉዳይ ብዙ ነገር ነው የተነጋገርነው። እድል አላችሁ። እሺ ወንድሜ
ይሰሙኛል ወይስ shall I speak on Amharic? I can also speak. Yeah, my name is Mesfin, and I worked for a very long time for the government, and now moved to the private sector. I want to raise one question related to the local entrepreneurs or people who want to actually create jobs and ideas. As you have already mentioned, content is actually the major component, and getting that type of content to actually invent or create some valuable information is actually a major challenge. The ecosystem here in Ethiopia is not actually initiating that type of activity so that it will just bring some valuable things to the market or to the society. Leave alone, for example, if I want to Google over internet to get the telephone number of the one institution, I am actually finding hardly to get it that information. Leave alone producing some content and some interaction and all those things to the community or to the people. Clearly, the ground is actually there, and there are also many Ethiopians who can actually try to make use of this technology, bring also some positive development in this regard. But the situation existing at this point of time to enable this type of movement and creation is actually a challenge. And my question is there any, specifically Kenya or any other country, do they have kind of processes that we are actually involved to bring this ecosystem workable or active, so that somebody is actually getting some content, make more creative and all these things to the market? This is my point.
እሺ እንዳልካቸው ባላለው ከጎንደር ዩኒቨርሲቲ እኔ መጠየቅ የፈለኩት ጥያቄ ምንድነው እነዚህ እንዳለ ሆነው አንደኛ ለምሳሌ ፍጥነት ልንጨምር እንችላለን ልናዳርስ እንችላለን ግን አሁን እኛ ጋር ያሉ ችግሮች ምንድናቸው የተሻለ ፍጥነት አለ ከሌላው አካባቢ ግን አጠቃቀሙ ላይ ብዙ ለምን ኮንተንቶች የሉንም ሎካል ኮንተንቶች ስለሌሉ ብዙ ጊዜ ትኩረት የሚደረገው ያለው ወደ ውጭ አክሰስ ማድረግ ነውና እነዚህ ኮንተንቶች ኢቭን አንዳንድ የተፈጠሩትን እነዛው ያሉ ኮንተንቶችን መጠቀም እንደ ምንድነው እንደ ጠቃሚ ነው ብሎ እስካለማሰብ ድረስ ይሄዳልና ዩኒቨርሲቲዎች ላይ ኮንተንቶችን ዲቨሎፕ ማድረግ በተለይ ደግሞ ወደ 36 ዩኒቨርሲቲዎች አሉ እርስ በርሳቸው ኮንተንቶችን ዲቨሎፕ አድርገው ወደ ማህበረሰቡን ለማስወጣት ምን ቢደረግና ሌላው ደግሞ እነዚህ በተለይ ደግሞ ሶሻል ሚዲያዎችን ነው በብዛት የምንጠቀመውና ከነሱ የሚገኙ ኮንተንቶች በተለይ ለኤዱኬሽን ሴንተሩ ያን ለአካዳሚክሱ ያን ያህል ናቸው ብለን አናስብም አንዳንድ ህጎችን ሴት ተደርገው እንዳይጠቀሙ ይደረጋል ግን ሪሊ እርስ በርሳቸው ዩኒቨርሲቲዎችም ሼር የሚያደርጉበት ሜካኒዝም ቢፈጠር የተሻለ አይሆንም ወይ ለዚህ ምን ቢሰራ ኮንተንቶችን ወደ ማህበረሰቡ ማስወጣት እንችላለን ምክንያቱም ብዙ ጊዜ የሚታሰበው ለምን ኢንተርኔት ስንጠቀም ወይ እንሰጣለን ወይ እንቀበላለን እና ብዙ ኮንተንቶች ከሌሉን እንደ ሀገር እነዚህን ሁሉ ሌሎችንም ፍጥነቱንም ጨምረን ሌሎችንም ጨምረን ብንሰራ የሚያመጣው ለውጥ ስላለ መጀመሪያ ከነዚህ ጋር መሰራት የለበትም ወይ ብላችሁ አታስቡ
ሌላ እሺ እዛ ከኋላ አረንጓዴ ቲሸርት
Okay, thank you very much. And my question is related with the Ethio Telecom privatization. As we know, there is a bid come out from Ethio Telecom, which is related with for selling the Ethio Telecom as privatization. And how do you look at the importance of this privatization for the development of the internet sector, for the use of the internet? So, as we see in this country, they said that there is a 4G internet access is launched, but still now it's not well done in the 3G even. But how do you look at this privatization change the access for using the internet and any other services? Could you clarify this? Thanks.
Okay. One. Okay. Yeah. Let's take that one and then discuss and then hopefully we'll give another chance.
Okay. አመሰግናለሁ በረከት እባላለሁ ከሐዋሳ ዩኒቨርሲቲ የኔ ጥያቄ ፎከስ የሚያደርገው ኢትዮጵያ ውስጥ ማለት በተለያዩ አፍሪካ ሀገራት
in different African countries the curriculum is normally based on two advanced countries. What we learn here is when we use internet, what is the internet, and what's its use, and we think we can do a lot with internet, but we learn a lot about use of water, but we don't learn about the container. We know about the water, but I don't have the container. Therefore, if the container is to be taken, then the water will become useless, nowhere to store it. So we have to go to the fundamentals of internet. How can we go to the fundamentals of the internet? And what's being done on that? And from other countries like Kenya, what is the experience there? How do they teach their local citizens? I would like to hear more on this issue.
Nice fashion. I don't have any of the questions mapped to any of you. So in summary, I think most of it is around content, which is expected, and that's extremely important. So probably can merge a couple of questions into one and saying that, yeah, it's all about the content. How can we do that? You know, we say that to solve our critical issues. Maybe later on, I'll try to summarize that. And the other one is privatization. I think related question. I hope the people who can answer that would be in the house So they can elaborate more on that. So I'm not going to put the burden on these guys. You guys have a right to skip that because the right stakeholders were supposed to be in the house to address those kind of conversations. And this was part of that. This was supposed to be part of that conversation. So and then I think that the last guy mentioned about the fundamentals. I think some of them were covered yesterday when we covered that the fundamentals specifically about that. I don't know if you were here yesterday, but those were covered. So unless you guys want to add some more stuff. So I think mainly the question is about content. How can we use the infrastructure to provide that bottom line need in terms of content and data provision? Want to start? Okay, Victor.
I think the question of content always crops up everywhere when you talk about internet, because half of the time you're accessing to consume some knowledge which has been developed somewhere. 2001, I had an argument with some of the vice chancellors as to why should we have connectivity in different universities. And my question was, why do we read books? And these books have been written, and the same books which are being used across, let's say, electrical engineering courses in the world. If you look online today, you can get all that content. And it boils down to one thing. You must start by consuming to be able to produce, because you'll know the rules and the dimensions within which this content is consumed. So you gain that expertise as you move on, but you really have to initially consume as much as possible. As an example, universities, when we started connecting in Kenya, almost 100% of the content which was being consumed was from outside. We started getting our own staff and research students and locally published journals to start going online. Today, Kenneth, which is, I think the statistics are there on kenya.or.ke, the biggest volume of traffic is inter-universities as well as with other universities in the world, because people have started generating relevant content that they can use. The biggest newspaper in Kenya is called the Nation Daily. Nation Daily on Saturdays, they have a section where the different professionals in the farming community provide solutions and free answers to questions asked. Half of the time, that site has over 10 million to 20 million hits on a Saturday, because people, especially the agricultural sector, have found it to be a useful resource. So it's been growing with time, from a time when you used to have one insert in the newspaper. Today, the newspaper does not carry as much information as they carry online, and it is one of the biggest, or rather the busiest sites in terms of knowledge which people can use. So it will start with people feeling as if we're just consuming foreign content, but with the time, you've gotten the expertise and you've gotten the ability, and the fear of putting anything online for whatever reasons will dissipate, and you'll start getting yourselves to produce content which is more relevant to what you're doing than any other thing. So I do believe there's still a lot of work to be done in this area, and people have to be brave enough to say, I am an expert in this domain and I'm going to work on it. One of the things which I hope will happen is shared workspaces. I think one of the things BRCK can attest to is that they started as a shared workspace called iHub. Became very popular with developers. I used to spend most of my afternoons there because the connectivity there was superb. There are many people you can talk to, and it was free. Actually, those days they even used to give us free coffee, but after some time, they commercialized and started selling us the coffee. But the point is that it was a shared workspace where you could get people to mentor you, and a lot of people really developed content from that area. And BRCK is just one of the products which came out of that area by the same group. So it's possible for us to create the ecosystem and people who can be able to develop content as we move on. We just need to keep pushing.
Yeah, just one quick thing. So one of our investors is the Case Foundation, who actually started America Online. And I think most of you here probably are not old enough to have really read anything about America Online. It was back in the 90s. And they made a big impact in the way the internet was rolled out in the States based on providing the front page to the internet. When you had AOL as your service provider, they provided this kind of immediate dashboard for your weather and your email and your links to your news websites. And then Google came along and Google killed them. Google killed them because they were faster, but the problem is it's a white page with a little box on it that if you don't know what's behind that white page, it's irrelevant to you. And I think this is where content, and you mentioned you can't Google details about ministries in Ethiopia. Well, I think there's a big opportunity for someone, and Mojo is starting to build some of this stuff where we can be the content provider. We can be the content aggregators in Africa for African content, because there's different needs for our users than there are in the US. And the education level around the internet is lower at the moment in Ethiopia than it is in the US. And so users aren't used to Googling everything they want to learn. We need to provide some guidance. We need to provide some education. And with time, the services will become more and more intelligent.
Good. Okay. Vic, should we wrap up now? Okay.
Okay, so there was a question on the impact of Ethiotel in terms of the privatization of Ethiotel on the. I like to say, even not being an expert in Ethiopia, I've been here a couple of times, but I'm not an expert. I like to remember the former minister, late former minister of telecommunications in Kenya, who's my namesake, Michuki, in 2005. I think in 2005, around March or May, Victor was in that meeting. Can't remember what we were launching. And someone asked him, well, the stakeholders were making a lot of noise and complaining about liberalization, etc. And he said, it's coming. Actually, that was early 2006. He said, and the Telecom Kenya monopoly was coming on June 30th, 2006. So all the stakeholders were in the room, and there was a lot of mama and negativity in the room. So he got upset. And the first question he asked is, liberalization is coming. The telecom monopoly comes to an end on 30th June. On 1st of July, are you ready? So I always remember that, because his face changed, his tone changed. And when he asked that question, none of the people in the room actually responded. Everybody, the stakeholders, private sector, all kept quiet, because it's a loaded question. So yes, privatization is basically opening up the space. So the question is, are you ready? Now I'll give you my take. You have about 18 months. Between now and the next 18 months, this will be a completely different country. And I'm taking that based on the experience we had in Kenya, because from 2006, June, it took about 18 months. Victor says 2007, I'll say early 2008 is when everything started changing. We had competitors trying to put fiber on the ground. We had all these other discussions about data centers started being built by Kenya Data Networks, which is now Liquid. We had all these other WiMAX service providers. So basically the space opened up. So are you ready? Because in the next 18 months, you'll either be watching as things are happening, because other people will be coming in and doing it, or you'll be a part of the people who are actually involved in that ecosystem. So the question is, are you ready? That's one. The second part of that question, loaded question, is what do you need to do to prepare yourself to be ready over the next 18 months? And I can tell you why I think it's 18 months. It takes about a year for licenses and things to be awarded, et cetera, for new operators to set up shop. And once the licenses are awarded, those 8 months or 6 months after is basically them setting up their operations to start competing. So before you start seeing billboards, we are the new ISP, etc., it's just about 18 months. So you have about 12 months to prepare yourself and 6 months to start launching whatever it is that you'll be launching to compete. Are you ready?
Thanks. that was a good one. Really good perspective. Mitch, am I still allowed to until 1:15? Yeah? Okay, I just want to make sure. Very serious on time. So if that's the case, I think there was somebody else who was raising hand earlier. Him. Okay, now you have the floor if you have the questions. Then. You want to ask?
I had a question. So I think I'm loud enough to be heard, right? So my name is Malak. I teach in a school of information science. So my question was...
it's been recorded, so or live transmission. So can you use the mic? Thank you.
So my name is Malaku. So I teach at the School of Information Science in Addis Ababa University. I'm a PhD candidate in software engineering. So my question is going to go to the Kenyan speaker. And most international high-tech companies have offices in Kenya, and that really encourages local people to engage in innovation and stuff like that. And particularly, we have challenges in the university to send our students for internship. So we don't have those vibrant companies, unfortunately, and we have many graduates with no job. So can you please tell us what did you do to attract these international companies to Kenya? So can you please share your experience? Thank you.
That is really, really critical question, actually, because it covers the first pillar. We said, growing the local workforce, and Reg also mentioned internship plays a critical role in it. Do we have those companies here to provide internship? Even the tech startups are struggling, let alone giving internship for others. So, great question, and hopefully we'll learn something. But I want to give one more chance, one more question, so that we can wrap up at 1:15 sharp. Or 7 ሰዓት ተኩል በሎካል ሰዓት። እሺ፣ አንድ ጥያቄ ካለ አንድ ሰው last chance. All right. So then, Victor, the floor is yours.
Well, that's a good question. And that's why I said at times you have to be deliberate in what you're trying to do. When around 2007, we deliberately wanted to make sure we attract multinationals to Kenya. But at the same time, we also wanted the local companies like BRCK and the others to grow to the level of the multinationals. So we introduced 2 key things which I can remember which encouraged multinationals. The first one was something we call multinationals and big companies in Kenya as well as SMEs breakfast meetings, so that every 2 weeks we used to have a meeting with the MNCs to listen to their problems and to find out what can we do as government. Actually, then PS, Professor Ndemo was the PS. And the idea was the MNCs or the people who wanted to set up business in Kenya had a place they could come and they could share ideas among themselves, and it would take away from them the things that we need to do to make their stay or expansion or growth much more easier. At the same time, we took advantage of interacting with the MNCs, and I remember people like Cisco, Microsoft, SAP, Oracle, and all these big companies used to send us experts for free to sit in our offices at the ICT authority and to really discuss ways and means of being able to grow the industry. But in turn, we would actually be able to sort of, for example, work permits, setting up in the secure areas and all those kind of things. We set up those meetings. We'd also make it possible for them to sit with senior government officers and try to impart some knowledge to them. So we created an environment which was fairly open. But the leadership also, especially the PS thing, Professor Ndemo, had a bit of a rough time because we created a timetable where every Friday, every 2 weeks on a Friday evening, we would spend time not only speaking to the MNCs, but speaking to the stakeholder community in one of the sites that we would identify. It would be like a shared workplace, like a hub where BRCK started from, or Nile Hub, or a university where he would meet students, and he would invite some of the MNCs to come with him, because then they would talk to the potential future employees, people who they'll employ, and they would give them the kind of thinking and requirements that they will be looking at. So besides the government being able to interact with MNCs, we try to expose the MNCs as much as possible. And in the process, we achieved quite a number of things. Not only did they expand their business and make Kenya, to a very big extent, their headquarters for the region of Sub-Saharan Africa, it also encouraged local small companies to start growing. And that to me was the biggest achievement, because we did get people who grew from being dealers and distributors to actually partners of these MNCs in more than one ways, where they were able to have a growth which was a win-win kind of arrangement between themselves. But more important is that they also grew a very big crop of expertise in different areas, which they were able to send to other countries to work. So we achieved quite a bit by just being open to these companies, and we didn't solve all their problems. For example, taxation issues up to today have never been solved because they are fairly complex. But we kept listening to them, government kept listening to them, and where possible, it would explain to them why we are not going to do this. I think one of the colleagues here said very clearly, at times it's not really meeting the expectation, but it's being very clear and open as to what is possible and what is not possible, so that one can plan. So there are many ways of being able to attract these multinationals as you grow your industry and create that synergy, which is a win-win environment. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Victor, Robert, Reg, and Noel, for your amazing perspective. Can we take 30 seconds and figure out those 3 topics for follow-on for the roundtable, so that the audience most likely would be on those roundtables, expounding more, so that they know and then get ready to ask their questions and perspectives. So I can give you 30 seconds, just one liner, and then put it together, and we're going to tell them what those topics will be for the roundtable. So take your time, 30 seconds. እስከዛ እናንተ ማጫወታችሁ በአማርኛ I hope አንዳንድ ነገር እንደተማራችሁበት። ብዙ ነው እያንዳንዱ ጥያቄ፣ ግማሽ ቀን ወርክሾፕ፣ ሙሉ ቀን ወርክሾፕ ይፈልጋል። ኪ የሆኑ ሰዎችን የሚፈልግ ነበር ከመንግስት በኩል ብለን በእርግጠኝነት እናገራለን። ከተለያየ ምክንያት እንግዲህ ያም አልሆነም። በተለይ ራውንድ ቴብሉ ላይ ሞር ስቴክሆልደርስ አኒድ የመሳሰሉትን እና
ውሳኔ
Mitch, my colleague, was telling me that the roundtable is actually heavily dependent on your contribution. So him ለዛ ነው ይሄን ሶስቱን ነገሮች የምነግራችሁ። ኦኬ፣ በእነዚህ ነገሮች ላይ ነው ከምሳ በኋላ። የምሳ በኋላ በጣም ኢንቲሜት ነው። ሊትራሊ roundtable ማለት በቃ በጠረጴዛ ዙሪያ ተቀመጣላችሁ፣ እነሱ እየተዘዋወሩ ይጠይቃሉ፣ እርስ በርሳችሁ ትወያያላችሁ፣ እነዛን ነገሮች እያመጣችሁ። ለዛ ነው ጋይዳንስ እንዲሆን 3 አበይት ጉዳዮች ላይ እንነጋገራለን አለን። ሀሳባችሁን እንድትሰበስቡ ነው አሁን ያለ ነግራችሁ የፈለኩት ማለት ነው። So yes, absolutely, as I expected, content ባይኖረን ይለው ነበር. So the content development is very important. አይደለም? Even let me ask you some very thought provoking questions. ወይ የሚረብሽ ጥያቄ። ኦኬ፣ ነገ ላይ 5G ሰጣችኋል ብትባሉ እንደ ሀገር እንደ just okay, you have 5G, what are you going to do with it? Are we going to just load social media content in a split second? Are we just going to entertain ourselves with Netflix content and chill at home? So this is extremely critical. While we have a farmer in a ገጠር ያለው የማርኬት የቡና ዋጋ ስንት መሆን የማያውቅበት ሀገር ላይ ቁጭ ብለን, so those are the use cases. ስናስብ ለእያንዳንዱ ኦኬ፣ ሩዋንዳ ውስጥ ቢዝነስ ላይሰንስ in 24 hours ይወጣል። እዚህ ሆዲፍጆ ስለዚህ ምንድን ነው የምናደርግበት ያ ነገር ቢወጣ? ስለዚህ ከዚህ አንጻር so number 1 for the afternoon round table is content development. ሁለተኛው can you help me who wrote it? Access to devices? No, number 2. What is number 2? Okay. This looks like a doctor's prescription handwriting. Hard to read it. You know, yeah, doctor prescription. It's hard to read it, but so shared infrastructure, which is very important, and then access to in-user device, right? Access to devices. In capital. So እነዚህ ሶስቱ ናቸው። በእነዚህ ላይ እያብላላችሁ ከምሳ ጋር ዳይጀስት እያደረጋችሁት ራውንድ ቴብሉ ላይ በእነዚህ ዙሪያ እናንተ ኮንትሪቢዩት እያደረጋችሁ እንቀጥላለን። እስቲ ያጨብጭቡላቸው። Thank you so much. እንግዲህ ለአስተባባሪዎች ይሰጣሉ።
Thank you very much for that very engaging session. I think I've really gained a lot from listening to all of you, and I hope that as well the participants have also been able to gain something. Now we'll go to lunch. It's 12:15, so we'll try and come back at 2. And at 2 we'll come back to this same room. The setting will be different. Okay, so we'll be having round tables, so pick a table and sit down, and I will give you the instructions on how we're going to conduct the round tables. So please be back at 2 so that we have enough time to engage in the roundtable discussions. So a round of applause again to a very capable moderator and the panelists. Thank you very much. Bon appetit and see you at 2 o'clock.